One way is if you have a unique business model. So for example, there's Airbnb, right? They're already in the market for some time now. And well, they have this sort of shared economy sort of business model where hosts can host their houses to guests. And that was a pretty unique model that appeared in the market some time ago, and they quite disrupted the market. That for some time, people used to say, well, this is the Airbnb for cars, this is the Airbnb for something. But right now, you also have Uber. Sometimes people go like, oh, this is the Uber for houses, this is the Uber for this and for that. So when you have this sort of unique business model, you have a way of standing out from competition, right? There are also other ways. For example, if you have a pretty innovative technology that is hard to copy. One example is Shazam. Shazam has this, well, Shazam, you identify songs, and at first it was very hard to copy Shazam, so they have this pretty much this advantage that if people want to copy Shazam, they have to go through all that hard technology. So they had a very big lead, and when the copycats arrived, they had already a very big user base. So that's also another way that you can have an edge on the competitors, I'd say. And there's another way, which is if you solve real problems, right? Here the example that I have is for Google Maps. They solve the real problem of localization and of navigation, getting somewhere, knowing where you are. But then again, this is a very old app, and like how many real problems are there left for it to solve? Because sometimes we are fabricating some real problems that are not really problems, you know. So that's the thing. There are a lot of apps out there, and it's probably very hard that you're going to be able to fit in one of those three categories to, let's say, stand out from the competition. So I'm here to talk about how UX can maybe help you get this bit of this edge to maybe stand out from the competition, right? So as I said, I'm Walter. I'm a senior UX designer at Lighting Beetle. Some of the projects that I have worked on are Hopin. I have worked on some projects for Orange and Telecom as well, some European agencies, Aseco Solutions, and some startups here locally and in other countries as well. So let's go. So you know Hopin, right? So Hopin is a text app. Pretty much you can use Hopin to get a text. Here in Bratislava, also in other cities in Slovakia, and I think you can also take Hopin in Czech Republic and also in Ljubljana. And they have been in the market for some time, since 2014. And they solve a real problem, right? Because getting taxis, it's sort of annoying when you have to call a company. And they also had this unique business model because they had this this way of getting taxi drivers, good taxi drivers, to subscribe for their app, and they had a good service to provide. And again, they were pretty early in the market, so they have this advantage. Great, right? But then there were these guys. There's Uber. They were getting very popular in other countries. They also had a very unique business model where people didn't need to be taxi drivers to work with Uber. And they also solve a real problem because sometimes the taxi drivers are not very good, the taxis are not very good. So it wouldn't take long for them to come to Slovakia because they were already coming to some countries in Europe, and it was just a question of time for them to get to Slovakia. So Hopin came to us, talking to us, to see if there's a way to use UX to just keep their advantage on the competition when Uber comes to the market. So there were a few things of this for Hopin, and I want to give you some of these things as, let's say, some best practice that you can use on your project as well. So first one, it is understand the problem. So you need to understand the problem that you're trying to solve, because it's not as simple as you go like, oh, I'm going to build an app that's going to help people get taxis. It's not like this. Boom, you make the app, you get the money. That doesn't help like this. There are things that you have to understand. So for example, you have to understand how business work. What are the relationships in the business that happen? You need to understand who is involved. For the case of Hopin, there are the taxi drivers, there are the users, there are the people managing Hopin, and some other actors in the market as well. And you have to think about the impact that's going to bring. For the case of Uber, there's the impact of the laws, how you work with the laws. And you also have to figure out what are the pains that you want to solve in the market. For example, Hopin wants to get rid of the pain of you having to deal with bad taxi drivers. So, what you can do, you should talk to users, like really talk to users, because sometimes you might think, well, I'm a user, and I take taxis every day, right? Not every day, come on. But like I take taxis, I can consider myself as a user of Hopin, but really you have to talk to the users. Well, in your case, if you don't have users because you're preparing something that's going to be launched still, you can think of who might be the users, and you have to talk to them. Another thing is for you to understand the domain. Even though I take taxis and every now and then, it doesn't mean that I really understand how the taxi business works. And who are the people that understand this best? In our case, it is either taxi drivers or our clients from Hopin. So that's one point that I want to make. You shouldn't neglect your clients, because sometimes you go like, well, my client doesn't know everything, so I'm not going to listen to him. Like this, he's saying some bullshit. But really, you should understand the domain, because if you don't understand the domain, you might just do something that doesn't work well enough. And so how did we do this for Hopin? So there were a few things we did. First, we did these user interviews with people. So what we did pretty much, we got some people to order some taxis, and we went with them on the taxis in the journey, and we just kept asking questions of how they felt about the journey, how the app was working, and we also talked to the drivers to see how they interact with the app, if there were any issues. Besides this, we also looked at the data, the usage data from Hopin that the client gave us, to see if there is any patterns that we can identify from the data. And we had a lot of workshops with clients, because they had the knowledge of the taxi business. So we had a lot of talks with them to understand properly what the business is. So what about you? What you can do to understand better the problem? Well, if you don't have that much budget for user experience, one thing that you can do that's fairly cheap, you can do questionnaires. You can send people questionnaires, ask a few things about how they feel about the app. You can do this on a regular basis. Other thing that you can do, you can check the store reviews. If you go to Google Play or Apple App Store, you can see some people complaining about some things, something that don't work. They say, I would like to have this thing in my app. So you can pay attention to that as well. And you can start installing some analytical tools for your app. Or you can just make a way so you can gather the data on the back end, so you can use that data, that usage data, later on to understand how people are using your apps. And you should talk to your clients. Really, you should not neglect your clients. Okay, second point that I want to make. You should focus on the right users. So this is where people actually make a lot of mistakes. Because as I said before, people sometimes go like, I'm the user of my app, so I don't need to talk to users, because I pretty much know how this is supposed to work. Or sometimes people go and say, well, you should design this for your grandma, because if your grandmother can use it, well, pretty much anybody can use it, right? But well, your grandmother probably is not going to use Snapchat or Instagram, so like you don't need to waste resources on your grandmother. You should design with the focus on who is actually the right user for your application. So people always use an app for a reason. People use Hopin for a reason. People use Instagram for a reason. And people also use apps in a certain situation. People might use the app in bed. People might use the app in the streets. So you have to pay attention to that as well. Who they are and what are the circumstances in which they are using the apps. And certainly there are some patterns that you can observe on how people use the apps as well. So this is what we did with this is what we learned with Hopin, right? When you took a look at all the data and these interviews and talking with clients, what we learned is that there were mainly these two types of users, what we call the business users and what we call the party users. So the business users are those people that take Hopin in a regular basis. They go to work, or they go to meetings, or they use Hopin for travel purposes, like business travel purposes. And they are the party users, those that go to a bar or a pub with Hopin, or they come back home from a bar or a pub with Hopin. And these were the people that we tried to keep in mind. And when we talk to these kind of people, we learned a few things. So I'm just giving some examples here, not everything that we learned from these profiles of people. So for example, these party users, we learned that sometimes it was hard for them to identify what were or was there a taxi at the exit of the club, because there were many cars that were similar and they were not very sure which car was theirs. So we introduced this feature where you can see what's the model of the car, what's the color of the car, so you have a better chance of knowing which car is yours. So that was one thing that we did for the party users. And then there's the business users. So we noticed some patterns in their behavior, that they normally go to the same places, normally go to work or to meeting with some certain frequent clients. And so we introduced that one on left. We introduced that, which is so a bit hard to see, but these are some frequent places and some favorite places where you travel to. So you don't have to every time type in the address, because you already have it there. And in this case, the other one here is because sometimes these business people, they go to very busy places, and it's very hard for drivers to stop and find a pickup location. So we designed a feature on the map that tells you some suggestions of where you can stand up for the driver to pick you up. So if you didn't have these sort of people in mind, probably wouldn't be able to come up with these features to help solve some of their problems. And then comes the question, what can you do for your users? So if you have the usage data, some analytical data, and if you talk to them, you're going to start to notice some patterns. So you can work on those patterns and try to figure out what are the kinds of people, what are the kinds of users that you're going to work with. And you should keep those people in mind as you move on with your development and design process. Okay, so the third point that I want to make: prioritize and iterate. So that's actually a point where people also make quite a few mistakes sometimes. Sometimes people think, well, I'm just going to release my app after everything's done, after all the features have been developed. I'm maybe going to do some beta testing at the end and just release it on the App Store. And then when people start to give me some feedback, I'm just going to fix the mistakes that I have and so on. However, you don't actually need to do that. Actually, no advice for you to do that. You need to prioritize what are the things that you have to focus on. So there are some features, there are some things that are more important than the other things, than some other things. And you should probably focus on those ones before. And you shouldn't wait for your beta app or alpha app to start testing. You can test as soon as possible. If you have your set of your main features, you can just draw some wireframes. If you're a fast designer, you can just draw some quick designs, and you can just make a prototype, go there and test, and then rework it until you feel secure that you have a solid idea of how it should work. So one example that I can give from Hopping is we had this, let's call 3 priorities of features. I'm not going to show you all the features here because Hopping has quite a lot of features. But what is essential for a taxi app to work? Well, you need to be able to order a ride. If you're not able to order a ride in a very easy way, then your app just failed. People are not going to use your app to order a ride. You need to be able to pay for the ride, because if you put your card there and then your card for some reason doesn't work, or if your payment with card is very complex or payment with money is very complex, then people are going to be less inclined to use your app. So these are essential features. So we worked on this, we wireframed this and designed this quite a few times and iterated it over quite a few times until we felt like this was solid enough. So there are also these things that are not essential, but that's still very important for your app to work, and will still give you probably some competitive advantage. And in the case for Hopin, we had these pickup points, which were a way to just make life easier for users, and also the favorite destinations, and also the identifying the car. It's just also a way to make the life easier for people. And lastly, we had the desired features. These are things that we could live without. It's not that the app wouldn't work if it didn't have this, but we could live without it. And this here, for example, is a rating system. So, because we changed a bit the rating system for Hopin, where it's not with stars anymore, you just say yes or no in something that you don't like with the right. And user profiles for drivers and passengers. These are things that are not entirely essential, but still bring some delightful, meaningful way to your app. So for each of these things, we didn't just do one wireframe, went for the design and just developed it, and we're good. For each of these things, we worked a few times and saw if it worked. If it didn't, we reworked, then we moved to the next one and worked on it a bit, saw if it worked, and moved to the next one. Okay, so what can you do for this? So you should figure out what's essential for you. So you should take a look at your app if you already have one, or if you're building one, you should look at it, should look at all the features you have. You get your users, and you look at the users, what they need, you see, and you just cross out what is essential, what is important, what is desired. And then once you do this, you're able to prioritize all you have to develop, all you have to design, and you're able to prioritize your efforts and maybe your releases. Because you don't have to release all the features at once. You can release the version 1.0 of your app, then you can release a few new features in version 1.1, in version 1.2, and this can even help your users be engaged and come back to see what's new. And yet again, build and test. And when I say build here, I don't say build your app, your code, beta, deploy it, and test. I mean, like you can build with a wireframe, you can build with a design, just build it in the cheapest way you find and test it in the cheapest way you find, because then you're going to save some money in the later game. Because if you find a mistake in the later game, when your app's already in the app store and you find out that you have to go talk to users again, you have to draw wireframes again, then it's going to be very expensive for you. Now the fourth point I want to make out of 5, it is to test for concept and usability. So what happens sometimes is that people tend to, well, not everybody, but it happens that you tend to test for bugs. You don't tend to test for your concept and for your usability. You go, you make an alpha or your beta, you send to some people, friends or users, and if they say, well, the payment's not working, there's a bug, and then you go and you fix it. But what might mean is that actually your concept's not working, your concept, your flow of how you order a ride is not working, your concept of how you pay for your service is not working. So the earlier you test, the earlier you are able to test for concept and usability instead of testing for bugs. So I'm going to exemplify with Hopin the way we did. So at the earliest stages of Hopin, what we did is just that we produced wireframes as every good agency normally does. You just do wireframes, right? So we produced some wireframes and we test with some people. Initially, we tested with people in the office because, well, we have Hopin users in the office because we have those business people, we have those party people. So at least this is an easy audience for you to test. So we had some wireframes, we tested some of these things with the people in the office. And when our concept of how to order a ride, our concept of how to pay for a ride, our concept of how to rate the ride, when that was more solid and we were more confident that that was the concept that we wanted to work with, then we went to more high fidelity wireframes, and then that's when we started to test on our lab, where we have our lab in the office, or we went to the streets to go for the journey again as we did at the beginning. And at that point, our concept was already solid, and we were more testing for usability issues. So is this easy to use? Is this copy understandable? Are these buttons on the right place? But the concept is already solid. It's more about usability issues at that point. So what can you do? So what you can do is just, as I said, you should test as soon as possible. Well, if you are a very right coder, you can do a very fast prototype on whichever your platform is your preferred one. Well, cool, great for you. So you can do that very fast and just test with people for the concept. But normally that might be still expensive. So as soon as you can test with wireframes, with whatever you have, that's great. And you test for concept, then later on you can test for usability. And you can do this with wireframe prototype. You can just, if you're using Vision or if you use any other tools, you can do a wireframe prototype and you can use that to test your application. there's another point that I want to mention with guerrilla testing. We didn't get to do that much with Hopin, but we have done this. We have been doing this quite often lately with Orange, Telecom, and Martinus. So guerrilla testing pretty much it is where you're very quick, you produce a wireframe, and without much bureaucracy, let's say, you just do a quick prototype and you go where your users are. So for example, for the case of Martinus, we prepared a quick prototype of the book detail page. It went to the Martinus store. There were some people there that are users of Martinus SCAP. So we just went there, we talked to people, we just approached some people, asked them to look at the screen and asked them a few questions. This saves a lot of money because you don't have all the bureaucracy of recruiting people, you don't have the bureaucracy of having to go through all the process of this formal user testing. So that's one suggestion that you can do as well. It's very cheap. You just go there. If it's very easy for you to find where your users are, that's a very good way for you to test. So that's one advice that I have to give to you. And finally, my last point, it is beware of standards. So people get used to things, right? If you look at iOS apps, if you look at Android apps, they all have this sort of like similar look and feel. So like if you try to reinvent the wheel, if you try to go for a different navigation pattern, a different way of doing some layouts, it's very possible that people might feel confused and they just might give up on using your app. If your app's not solving a real problem, if your app's not really have a unique business model. Because after all, people spend most of their time on other apps. They're not going to spend most of their time just using your app. People spend a lot of time in many apps. And if they're used to a lot of common behaviors, they want to see those common behaviors on your app as well. So you probably already know this, but well, you have the Apple iOS standards. You can see this on the human interface guidelines for iOS. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but there are things that are pretty standard. For example, the bottom navigation where you have the main section of your app at the bottom. That's pretty much standard, right? So if you put this there, people are going to look at it. You're going to know, well, this is a bottom navigation. I know how to navigate between the section of the app. You also have the Google material guidelines, right? Again, this is very well spread. People know about many of the standards that you see there, the guidelines. People know that there is this card concept, that you work a lot with cards. People know there are these floating buttons where you can take normally the main action of the app. And there's normally on material design, you have this top bar where you can normally find a search. So that's also a pretty standard way of doing that. So if you use those patterns, there's a higher chance that people are going to understand how your app works. But then there's a question that I see sometimes because people say, well, okay, these are guidelines, but these are not, let's say, natural laws of nature. It doesn't mean that you cannot play around with it. It doesn't mean that your app is not going to have a personality. So I have two examples here. So here we have Asana. Asana, they showcase well some of the principles of material design guidelines, and they put their little twist on it. You can see that they have this action button floating there, but they have this nice color going around that you can see on the theme all over as well. And they also play with this micro interaction where sometimes when you put a heart or a like, there's this nice animation that goes around, which means like they have a personality. They don't need to be bland just because they're following some guidelines, right? And the other example that I have there, that's the Nintendo Switch online app for Splatoon 2. So you can see that there's this cookie sort of crazy style still of Splatoon with these like vibrant colors, but you can still see there, you see the bottom bar navigation there. You see the air, you see the cards. So it's still there, personality there, you can still see the person. At the point, when you see a wall, obliged percent, you can still bend it to have. Still, you should beware, do not reinvent the wheel, and they might use your app properly. Okay, so these were the 5 things. How you can use some UX approach, meaningful apps. So to really learn, understand the domain, understand the users. Design for the right users. Don't design for a grandma, don't design for yourself. Design for the right users. Prioritize and iterate. So set your priorities straight and work multiple times. don't just think that you can do everything at once and just release at the end and it's going to be perfect. Fourth, do not test only for bugs. Test for the concept, validate your idea works, and also test for usability. See if your app is friendly. And finally, keep an eye for standards, but don't think that standards are just laws. Standards are guidelines that you can bend a bit to give some personality, but still follow them. So what I just wish that you take out of this presentation, besides those things, is that when you talk about UX, working with apps, it's not just about wireframing. It's not like about wireframing and testing. UX for apps, it's also about being strategic. It's being able to approach the problem in a strategic manner. All right, thank you.
Any questions?
I would like to ask if, let's take your sample project, and let's say it's over, and I would like to know whether and how do you measure the impact the user experience change has had on the growth of revenue to the customer. Is this of any interest to you as a company to know this data, or you just don't care?
Oh, we normally hear that back from the clients, actually. The clients normally, they have a ways of tracking conversion rates, if things have improved or not. So we normally either measure those things with analytical tools that we either install it together with the client, or the client comes back to us, or we ask the client, so how is this, how is it doing? And of course, you can also check the feedback from the users. So it's normally this manner. And if there's something wrong, of course, we go back, we test it again, and we see if there's some way that we can rework that thing.
Thank you, because my question was pointing to the direction, what would be the average upselling percentage, or is there any number you would deem to be rational to say, let's say if I invest in UX experience upgrade, what is the expectation from the business point of view which we can expect? Or is this too
I think that's very subjective depending on which sort of business you have, because definitely the sort of raise on conversion that you get from Martinus is probably going to be different from the conversion with Hopin, and there are also other players in the market. If you still make a very good redesign, you may build a very good app, but then there comes a new app or like a bigger app like Uber and just makes everything much better, then there are other things that factor to the conversion rate. So that's very subjective. You have to really see it from project to project. So I'm sorry I don't have a very specific answer to give you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Somebody else?
Other questions?
No one.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Walter. Tak bez prestávky. Lukáš? Je? No?
OK, takže thank you very much, Walter. A ďakujem veľmi pekne.